In this podcast, we look at resources in a local Bridgetown forest, as well as resources that are commonly used in land care. I just wanted to draw your attention to the recent rains. Here we can see almost like a natural swale or a berm just from leaf littered detritus, mostly sort of grassy material, but you can see how the water has created this pattern. And, there wouldn't be much carbon in it, but it still is a resource, We humans need to learn to value the mulch materials. And we do to a degree, but not the stuff that really counts. I'm actually just walking into the forest, but I had my attention drawn by this snag. A standing snag. A tree that failed in a storm event, probably was a forest tree with an exposed crown that it wasn't used to the wind forces as a result of the clearing around it and failed. Though what caught my attention was the brown rock decay discussed in part 2. Nature's biochar, full of associate microbiology. Made of charcoal and compost tea, biochar is a man-made product. A product I do not trust as being as inclusive of the microbiology generated in nature, such as decayed wood. So coming back to the snag itself, this was a single stem tree that had a tension failure. Based on established science, there are 2 key types of tree failure concerning the trunk. There's tension failure and branch breakout failure. Based on my professional background, I have a large body of work on tree failures all around Australia. I specialise in the area of tree retention and risk management. Whilst in transit to the forest, I observed this firewood pile. Rather than set fire to your timber, let the microbiology burn it, and in the process you'll have humus, the best grade compost on the planet. So I'm walking into what's known as Maslin Reserve. This is forest which was extensively cleared for jarrah timber. Vegetation in here is a good indicator of the health of the soil underneath. The species diversity in the understory vegetation here is still very, very good. I come for walks in here a number of times and got lots of pictures of wildflowers. So in a reserve like this, by no means is this an example of a true forest. There are no old age class trees at all. They've all been harvested. But you can see plenty of material which has made it to the ground. Fallen logs, dead limbs. These carbon sources are all utilised by the microbiology that is in the forest system. But material like this essentially is a major resource for the brown rot fungi, which turn the carbon back into a resource that can be utilised by the plants and by the associate microbiology. Another very much overlooked resource, the leaf litter. People go to landscape yards and they pay premium dollar for these mulches. And then they rake up this material and throw it away. And yet this material is seeded with microbiology. When a leaf is shed, or prior to shedding, the sugars are sucked out of a leaf, and then the microbiology is on the surface of the leaf. It already becomes active by the time it's been shed, and it's in the process of turning this into compost, into humus. And so by the time it gets to the ground, the decay process is fully underway. But this is the kind of material that plants need, not these sort of factory shopped mulches that are sold for premium grade in landscape yards. So just consider in this environment all of the natural fishes that are in this soil, from all the varying plants, large and small, the burrowing animals, the burrowing insects, there's fishes galore. And the interconnectedness of all the root systems and the rhizosphere, or the soil root interface. We can consider the constant slowing of root hairs that are being shed below ground. If we think of leaves being shed above ground, so there are root hairs being shed below ground. This all adds to the biological mix below ground. and the continual aeration of the soil. So when I'm considering tree health for a tree in a given location, I do my homework. I go out into the field and I have a look at the species that are naturally being associated with the trees in question, the trees that I wish to support. The Naturaculture strategy, as I see it, is all about mimicking what nature is doing. She is our greatest teacher. This sample of photographs I took myself in Maslin Reserve, just as a means to capture the level of species diversity which is common to these sorts of ecosystems in Western Australia. Absolutely astonishing, the flowers of this part of the world. Once I have a handle on my species identification, I compile lists and then I seek out local growers, so re-veg growers that grow all these plants as tube stock. And we're looking at plants here which range in price from $2.50 to $3.50 a plant, maybe larger pot sizes up to $6. And this is my seed bank. This is my go-to, and it's a joy to support local growers. So no matter where I go in the world, I could be looking at an oak tree in Europe. I look at the species that naturally associate with that tree. I could be looking at a hickory in North Carolina. This strategy, or the Naturaculture strategy as I call it, is really simple. So this is what I call the plant component of a plant system. A nutrient bed and a plant system combined is an ecosystem. Nature's resources. So when it comes to observing sick trees, oftentimes it's the roadside trees, the ones closest to the roadside, where you'll see the most. You'll see the symptoms of, be it maricanker, Phytophthora. These are where the declines are at the greatest, the roadside trees. And there's a tree growing. There's a tree here which is a Banksia, one of the local native Banksias, which has got dieback. This is a very common indicator of Phytophthora, which is a fairly major disease which is running rampant in the Australian bush. This is probably one of the toughest ones to manage in Australia. But again, as with all the diseases impacting on plants, it's because of disturbance. Dirt roads, pathways, high voltage power lines, anywhere where we're compacting soils, creating highways for organisms to come in, such as Phytophthora. With disease suppression in mind, or oasification, the roadside trees are the first to treat vertical fissures, plant systems, and nutrient beds. Lined along the verges with logs salvaged from land clearing to support restoration and keep people off. So these are marigums. It's interesting to note that the marigums are resistant to Phytophthora, and yet of course they're subject to maricanker. One of the things that I consider as I look around the world and look at all these remnant forest systems wherever it is, here in this country I really like to imagine what it would have been to have been in this, when we had all the age classes present, when we had where the ecosystem was essentially unbroken in its diversity. We know that as a result of the First Nations people, that coal burns were being carried out right across Australia, and there's such an artistry in the fire management that the First Nations people were doing. And down the track in the future, I would really like to form an association with some educators who still are teaching the old ways, because fire management, modern fire management with the white Australian, it doesn't add up to the same level of expertise as what was practiced. The issue is hot fires versus cold. You need to do your own research to understand the difference. But I must make reference to this book again, Fire Country by Victor Stephenson, a First Nations man with First Nations wisdom and life learning. This book needs to be integrated by the land care professional without any doubt. And the likes of Victor Stephenson should be celebrated all over Australia. So with treating trees, reflecting on parts 1 and 2 of this playlist. As the trees grow in size, we need to extend the circle of treatment out. This is the foundation of a nutrient bed. In time, the trees will sufficiently supply their own mulch. No matter the age or size of the tree, we always need to be treating to just beyond the drip line. Starting with a nutrient bed, we progress to planting to create plant systems under trees. This then becomes an ecosystem. I have to say I was inspired with this Bridgetown property with observing the uses of coffee rock and gravel being used as screes, which is a form of mulching but with rocky materials. This kind of landscaping has a great visual effect, and it would be very, very viable to do the kind of below ground treatments I've discussed underneath this kind of landscaping. Cap it with a high grade mulch, and then cap it with these sorts of materials for the visual effect. But the moisture retention and the proliferation of fungi underneath would still be very viable. A perfect environment for growing many of the coastal plants, the Western Australian coastal plants that grow in natural heathlands. I've noticed in my time in Bridgetown that the use of this mulch, this sort of red coloured mulch, is very popular. The thing that I would like to say about these sort of factory shop mulches is biologically they're actually inert. They're comprised of fresh wood chip. My concern with these man-made mulches is with the ingredients, such as this red dye. What kind of impact could that have? Is that on the soil? We don't really know. It's fine for these mulches to have visual appeal, but they need to be able to deliver biologically as well. That is more important for the sake of the plants. Close study of the foliage of this choice here indicates high levels of stress, whether it's associated to the mulch or to the use of chlorinated water. It's difficult to say, but both assist with the desertification process. For growing any kind of a garden, our focus needs to be on oasification. So still on the topic of resources, I've gone on to another Bridgetown property just to have a look at how these people are operating. And incidentally, there's a bit or a lot of naturaculturists in all of us, because we all come from the same stock. We all come from essentially the same gene pools. We all were born to have a relationship to the land. Whether that's been switched off or not, it's in us, and it's something that we can activate just by working the land. And here we can see a group planting. Plants always do well in groups, especially when you're using berms and mulches. And the mulches that we have available are either mostly comprised of cellulose or they're mostly comprised of lignin, such as your wood chip. But essentially, we're looking at the same materials, the same resources. Again, we have the use here of pea straw. This pea straw is seeded. This material will produce peas, which assist in the process of fixing nitrogen, as the pea family does. This is why there are so many understory plants of the pea family that grow in association with forests. And I must say, I really appreciate the work that's going on here. I would never advocate the use of black plastics under mulch layers because you're retarding the nutrient cycle. But in this case, the owner is really very, very smart. Like she lays out sections of black plastic to to kill off the turf grasses, to radiate them, because the heat radiates that black material, which radiates down into the soil. Okay, it would retard the biology beneath for a spell, but it's a minor thing because you're getting a complete kill without having to use any herbicides. Following this process, there still would, in my world, need to be some restoration done, some vertical fissures made to help reoxygenate the soil, because this is heavily compacted. Decades of livestock, field pasture, you know, people pressure, you know, all the things which I've talked about. I mean, I know that this garden here has been watered purely with rainwater, and you know, the owner herself has acknowledged just how vastly different and better it is that she does that compared to our other sections of the garden where she's running off town water. But you can see, you know, I mean, this is a happening, growing environment being established in, you know, a major drought area, major drought conditions, you know, being done so sustainably with you know, exceptional benefits for amenity, for pleasure, for shade, and ultimately food production. So yeah, I just had a closer look at this material. This is actually some kind of shredded pine. Now, I mean, as far as carbon sources go or resources go, you know, this isn't ideal because this material has been harvested live or green and then processed green, and it doesn't actually have any microbiology in it. It's nothing like, you know, leaf litter, twig litter, or wood material that has been processed slowly by nature. That's a cold process, whereas the harvesting and processing of materials like this is actually a hot process. And here we have the material. Because this is full of sugars, in essence, it's volatile. So when you stick it in a large heap, it heats up and heats up and heats up. And in actual fact, you know, piles of wood chip can, you know, can set fire. And this is an example, you know, of cooking the resource. It's a bit like if we, you know, get a very healthy food source, you know, it could be meat, it can be plant, and overcook it. Well, nutritionally, it doesn't have what we need, you know, the nutrition is lost. I still would use material like this over nothing, but ideally, I'm going to be using cold processed materials because they're seeded with microbiology, but they also help feed the microbiology in the soil. A good test of any mulch or soil is to investigate. Both by smell and eye, our senses reveal the life in the interface between mulch and soil. In this case, we can see evidence of a layer of newspaper between the mulch and soil. This is the common permacultural practice. I myself have experimented with this and, based on experience, do not support the use of newspaper. In closing on this session on oasification, I just wanted to draw attention to the thermal properties of plants, on how they help to keep soils cool through their bodies. This playlist forms the background to my first workshop. This I shall be offering up in the southwest of Western Australia first. You can check my website for details if you wish to attend.